In April 1970, 11 American Rangers drop into a valley in northern South Vietnam that has already destroyed patrol after patrol before them. They are the elite of the reconnaissance war, trained to move unseen and report what they find. Instead, within minutes of landing they are spotted, surrounded, and fighting for their lives against an enemy that has learned to expect them. Over the next 10 hours, Team Grasshopper will reveal exactly how far the American reconnaissance mission has drifted from the idea that created it. By 1970, the war the United States is fighting in Vietnam is not the war it planned for in 1965. The large search and destroy battles have given way to a slower, more ambiguous conflict, and much of the intelligence driving American operations now depends on tiny teams inserted deep into enemy territory to watch the trails and count the traffic. These are the LRRPs and the men of Lima Company, 75th Infantry Rangers, attached to the 101st Airborne Division, are among the best of them. To understand what happens to Team Grasshopper, you first have to understand the concept those men are supposed to embody, and why, in certain valleys, that concept has quietly stopped working. The LRRP idea is simple and for a time effective. Rather than push large formations through the jungle and announce American presence for kilometers around, the Army inserts teams of 5 or 6 men to observe and report without being seen. Their weapon is information, not firepower. A successful patrol sees everything and is seen by nothing, and the entire doctrine rests on a single assumption: that a handful of men can only survive in enemy territory if they remain invisible, because no team that small can win a stand-up fight on ground the enemy knows better than they do. That assumption is the foundation of the whole program. By 1970, in the mountains of Northern First Corps, it is beginning to collapse. The problem is the terrain and the years the enemy has spent living in it. The Northern Highlands are a sanctuary and a highway for the North Vietnamese Army, a network of base camps and supply trails feeding the war further south. The NVA know this ground intimately. More importantly, they have studied how the Americans hunt them, and they have learned to read the signature of a reconnaissance insertion, the helicopters flaring into a small clearing, the brief touch on the ground, the sudden silence afterward. Over a 2-month stretch, Lima Company watches an unusual number of its insertions turn hot within minutes. Teams meant to spend days in silence are drawing fire before they can even clear the landing zone. The American response reveals how serious the problem has become. Rather than pull back from the worst areas, the company begins running what it calls heavy teams. Where a normal patrol is 5 or 6 men, a heavy team fields 11 or more, with extra machine guns and grenade launchers. The logic is straightforward. If the teams can no longer count on staying hidden, they should at least be strong enough to fight their way out of the ambush that now seems inevitable. There is a quiet irony in that decision. A program built entirely around stealth has reached a point where its own planners are assembling squad-sized combat units and hoping firepower can stand in for surprise. The heavy team is, in effect, an admission written into doctrine that the original idea has failed. Alongside the added firepower comes a second adaptation aimed at deception. If the enemy can recognize a recon insertion by its small footprint, then the Rangers will try to disguise it, staging arrivals that look like larger conventional operations in the hope the NVA will hesitate or prepare for the wrong fight. Whether any of this will actually work is an open question. Team Grasshopper is about to test it. On the 8th of April 1970, in the mountainous jungle of Northern First Corps, Team Grasshopper prepares to insert into an area that has become notorious inside the company. Other patrols sent into the same ground over the previous 2 months were shot out within hours. The team is led by Sergeant Bernie Zentner, and it numbers 11 men, including a Kit Carson scout named Ut, one of the former enemy soldiers who have come over to the American side to serve as guides and interpreters for the units they once fought. The insertion is designed as theater. Instead of 1 or 2 helicopters, the Rangers come in aboard 4 Slicks, the troop-carrying Hueys, with the last 2 aircraft deliberately empty. Anyone watching from the tree line is meant to see a formation large enough to suggest a real operation, rather than a recon team. It is the deception doctrine in practice. an attempt to buy the patrol a few hours of enemy uncertainty. The ground tells its own story. The landing zone sits on a finger of a major ridgeline, and running the length of that finger is a trail so broad the Rangers describe it as freeway-like, with smaller paths branching off in every direction. Enemy trails are usually camouflaged with obsessive care, hard to spot even from the ground. This one was easy to see from the air the day before. A trail that size, left that visible, is not reassuring. It suggests heavy traffic and an enemy confident enough to stop hiding. The operational picture, assembled in the first moments on the ground, reads as a stark list. A team of 11 has landed where multiple previous patrols were destroyed within hours. A major, heavily used trail network runs directly through the landing zone. Enemy troops are spotted within minutes of touchdown, and the nearest support is a helicopter flight away, dependent on aircraft that will themselves become targets. Every one of those conditions points the same direction. The trouble announces itself almost at once. As the first slick unloads and the Rangers move to clear the zone, they spot a large group of NVA to the east, sprinting downhill and away from the landing zone. A light observation helicopter covering the Insertion then radios down that it has seen 2 more enemy soldiers on the trail above the team. The deception has not worked. The enemy has watched them come in, and the enemy is already moving. For a few minutes the Rangers hold, trying to read the situation. When no immediate attack comes, Zentner makes the first of several decisions that will define the mission. He sends a small party down the trail to the east, toward the direction the larger enemy group went, to develop the situation. Steyen and Johnson move out with the scout Oot, patrolling about 100 meters ahead before Oot spots more enemy just in front of them. The scout eases back and reports what his instincts are telling him. A very large enemy base camp is somewhere close. This changes the calculation entirely. The 3 men work their way back and report, and the reality is now undeniable. The team has been seen, it is compromised, and it has lost the one advantage every LRRP patrol is built to protect. The mission as planned is already over. What Zentner does next runs against the instinct of the entire doctrine. A compromised team's textbook move is to break contact, reach a defensible position, and get extracted before the enemy can concentrate. Instead, Zentner decides to turn the situation inside out. He knows the area is hot and that the NVA will soon be hunting in force, so rather than wait to be found, he chooses to hunt first, reasoning that an aggressive move toward the enemy is the last thing they will expect from a small team that has just been compromised. The Rangers will go after the NVA, and after a body count, and try to beat the enemy to the ambush. It is a calculated gamble, and it captures something essential about how these teams have adapted to survive. Stealth has failed, so the team leader reaches for surprise of a different kind, the surprise of unexpected aggression. Zentner moves the team about 500 meters from the landing zone, pulls his men into dense cover, and waits. It is nearly 4:30 in the afternoon, and they have already been on the ground for 3 hours. Then he adds one more layer of deception, radioing quietly for the slicks to return and stage a fake extraction, lifting off as though carrying the team away, in the hope the NVA will believe the Americans have gone. The response to that maneuver ends any remaining doubt about the enemy's strength. As the first slick climbs and the second pulls away from the empty landing zone, an NVA heavy machine gun, a .51 caliber weapon, opens fire on the helicopters from a concealed position less than 75 meters below the hidden Rangers. The presence of a heavy anti-aircraft gun hauled into position and sighted to cover the landing zone is itself a piece of intelligence. This is not a chance meeting with a few soldiers on a trail. This is a prepared enemy force that has anticipated exactly how the Americans would try to leave. What the Rangers hear next stays with the survivors. As the heavy gun hammers at the departing helicopters, they can hear the enemy soldiers laughing and moving up the hill toward them, certain the Americans are gone, unaware the team is dug into the cover directly in their path. The hunters walk straight into the hunted. Specialist Mike Blinston sees them first and opens fire, killing the enemy point man before he can react. The rest of the NVA immediately rush the perimeter. In those first seconds, Rob McSorely, Zentner, and Blinston stand directly in the path of the assault. McSorely grabs the M60 machine gun from Zentner and opens up on the massed soldiers, killing 2 outright and throwing the attack into confusion. In the middle of that chaos, by the account preserved from the men who were there, McSorely turns to his friend Frank Johnson and shouts, "Wow, I feel just like John Wayne." That the men can joke in the opening moments of a fight for their lives says something about who they are and how they have trained themselves to function under fire. It does not make the situation any less serious. The frontal assault stalls against the wall of fire the Rangers put out. McSorely works the machine gun while Johnson fires M79 grenade rounds to airburst in the trees above the enemy, showering them with fragments from above. The NVA break off and try to flank the small perimeter, and again the volume of American fire drives them back. For the moment, firepower is doing exactly what the heavy team concept promised. The fight settles into something longer and grimmer. For the first 20 minutes, the team struggles even to reach the command and control aircraft circling at a distance, a reminder that for all their firepower, these men remain utterly dependent on communications and aircraft they do not control. When they finally get through, they request immediate gunship support, and before long an AH-1 Cobra arrives overhead and begins placing suppressive fire on the enemy positions below. The casualties accumulate the way they always do in these fights, not in a single blow but in a steady erosion. A rocket-propelled grenade bursts 10 meters in front of the perimeter, and Steichen takes shrapnel in the forearm. Minutes later, Blinston is hit by an AK-47 round through his left bicep. The perimeter holds, but the men inside it are being worn down one at a time. After roughly an hour of close fighting, Zentner decides it is time to break contact and move back toward the original landing zone. Darkness is less than 2 hours off, and he understands the team needs to reach a position where it can be extracted before night makes everything worse. The withdrawal is where the engagement turns from a successful defense into a tragedy. As the team pulls back, Johnson stays behind to rig a claymore mine paired with a white phosphorus grenade beside the trail. He waits in cover until nearly a dozen NVA move into the kill zone, then detonates it, killing the entire group in a single blast. It is textbook rearguard work, and it buys distance from the force pursuing them. But the enemy is not only behind them. About 100 meters closer to the landing zone, McSorely, now walking point, runs directly into a second enemy force maneuvering down from the high ground. He opens fire and kills 3 of them before his Car-15 carbine jams. In the seconds it takes to clear the malfunction, the remaining NVA fire back, hitting him across the chest. He goes down severely wounded, roughly 10 meters ahead of the rest of the team and out in the open. Almost simultaneously, Sergeant Bill McCabe is hit in the elbow, the round shattering the joint and taking him out of the fight. Zentner moves up toward the firing and drops 2 more of the enemy with the machine gun. The team has blunted this second assault as well, but it now has a man down and dying in the open, and the problem of reaching him becomes the crisis around which the rest of the night will turn. 2 Rangers, Johnson and Paul Morguch, move immediately to go out after McSorely. He has been a close friend to Johnson and a mentor to Morguch, and neither is willing to leave him lying exposed. But before they can move more than a few feet, Sergeant Gary Sands orders them back to guard the team's back trail, and says he will go himself. What Sands does next is the kind of act recon men understand as simply what you do for your own. He reaches the front of the patrol, then low crawls 10 meters across open, fire-swept ground to McSorely, who against the odds is still alive, and drags him back to the perimeter as enemy rounds pass close overhead. It is a genuine act of courage, and it is not enough. Despite everything Sands does to reach him, Rob McSorely dies about 15 minutes later. By now the engagement has settled into a pattern that will hold for hours. The Rangers hold a small perimeter. The enemy probes it, hunts for a weak point, and is thrown back each time by a combination of gunships overhead and disciplined fire from the ground. The Cobras work their rockets and miniguns closer and closer, eventually silencing much of the heavy fire from below, and then the fire from above the position begins to slacken as well. Then the light fails, and with darkness the danger of being overrun multiplies. This is the point at which the battle becomes, more than anything, a demonstration of American mastery of night aerial firepower, and of how completely a surrounded ground unit has come to depend on it. An AC-130 flare ship, One of the aircraft the men called Spooky arrives overhead and drops parachute flares over the trapped Rangers for the better part of an hour, turning the black jungle into a shifting landscape of harsh light and moving shadow that denies the enemy the cover of darkness. Under that light, Johnson crawls out again, sets another claymore 20 feet downhill, and returns to his position. 20 minutes later, the enemy moves up exactly as he anticipated, and he detonates the mine directly in their faces, breaking the assault and driving the survivors back down the slope. Through the rest of the night, the NVA keep maneuvering around the perimeter, staying just out of sight in the underbrush, searching for a gap. The Rangers answer with grenades. Sands and Morguch alone throw more than 40 fragmentation grenades between them at enemy who have crept within 10 meters of the position, while Johnson, Boland, and the scout Oot kill more with rifle fire. The enemy meanwhile bring up additional 51 caliber machine guns and open fire on the circling helicopters from 2 nearby ridgelines, turning the airspace above the team into a gauntlet. That gauntlet takes its own price. Later in the night, a medical evacuation helicopter tries to hover over the perimeter to lift out the dead and wounded, but the fire is too intense for it to hold position. Before it pulls away, the co-pilot is killed, and the aircraft commander and crew chief are both wounded. The men on the ground are not the only ones dying to get them out. Just after midnight, another gunship, a Stinger, arrives and asks the Rangers to mark their position with a strobe light so it can tell the perimeter from the enemy in the dark. One of the newer men, Specialist Dave Hazelton, moves to the center of the perimeter, lies down on his side, and holds his arm up with the flashing strobe extended, keeping it raised through the rest of the battle. It is an act of nerve made harder by the fact that the light marks him as clearly for the enemy as it does for the friendly gunship above. The Stinger orbits tight over the position, firing its miniguns in an arc just outside the perimeter. At one point, an errant burst tears straight through the middle of the team without hitting a single man. A margin of survival so thin it can only be called luck. With the enemy fire finally suppressed, the extraction can begin, and it comes in stages across the small hours of the morning. Around 20 past midnight, a pair of Hueys moves in. The first lowers a jungle penetrator and lifts out McSorley's body and the badly wounded McCabe. The second edges in behind it and extracts Stein and Blinston using rope rigs. That leaves 6 surviving Rangers and the Kit Carson scout still on the ground, still fighting. At about 5 past 2 in the morning, while Cobras work the surrounding jungle, a final slick comes in over the smoke-filled perimeter and drops a ladder. With tracers still crossing the night in red, white, and green, the remaining men rig their rucksacks and those of the dead and wounded with booby traps, then climb the swaying ladder up into the helicopter. They reach the Lima Company compound at Camp Eagle at 3:15 in the morning, after more than 10 hours of continuous heavy contact. In keeping with a company tradition for men returning from the edge, they are escorted to the mess hall and fed all the steak and eggs they can hold. The accounting of that single patrol lays out the cost plainly. 1 Ranger, Rob McSorely, is killed. 3 more are wounded. Among the supporting aircraft, 4 Cobra gunships and 2 Huey slicks take hits and sustain serious damage. A medevac pilot is killed, and 3 other pilots and 2 crewmen are wounded. The enemy, by the Rangers' assessment, pays a far heavier price in dead and wounded. Though, as with nearly all such figures from this war, the enemy body count is an estimate made under fire and in darkness, not a verified number is. There is a detail in McSorley's death that lingers past the tactical facts. He is a Canadian citizen. Unlike the other men of Lima Company, he is under no legal obligation to serve in the American war at all. He volunteered his way into one of the most dangerous jobs the Army offered, and he died in a valley his own country had no part in. Placed against the broader arc of the war by 1970, what Team Grasshopper's night reveals is how thoroughly an enemy that had learned the American patterns had transformed the reconnaissance mission. The whole premise of long-range patrolling was that a small team could hide. In the sanctuaries of Northern First Corps, that premise had collapsed. The NVA watched the landing zones, recognized the insertions, sighted heavy machine guns to cover the likely extraction points, and moved reaction forces toward the sound of helicopters. The Rangers' countermeasures, the heavy teams and the deception flights, were intelligent adaptations, and on this night they kept most of the team alive. They did not restore the invisibility the mission was built on, because nothing could. The engagement also underscores a dependency that ran through the entire American way of war in Vietnam. Team Grasshopper survives not because 11 men can outfight the force arrayed against them, but because of what circles above them: the Cobras, the flare ships, the Stinger, the Slicks that come back again and again through anti-aircraft fire. Strip away that aerial support, and the team is almost certainly overrun in the dark. The men on the ground fight with extraordinary discipline, but their survival is purchased in large part by aircraft and aircrews, and some of those crews pay for it with their lives. By the spring of 1970, the United States has already begun withdrawing from Vietnam, handing the war to South Vietnamese forces under the policy of Vietnamization. The reconnaissance units are still going out, still being compromised on insertion, still fighting these 10-hour battles in valleys the Americans will soon leave for good. Team Grasshopper wins its fight in the narrow sense that most of its men come home and the enemy suffers worse. But a program designed to slip through enemy territory unseen has been reduced to fighting its way back out of ambushes it can no longer avoid, on ground that American strategy has already decided to abandon.